Hello and welcome back to Perspectives. Today's guest is the Mindful Mover. Philip, along with his wife Martina, run online coaching on how to get around arguably the biggest obstacle when it comes to training: time. Time, or lack thereof, is a common reason why people don't train. Balancing work life with home life, along with the responsibilities each of those bring, daily life is filled with activities that leave little room for much else. But what if there was a way to improve your fitness without spending countless hours in the gym? In this episode, Phil talks me through why multiple training sessions throughout the week may not be the most effective strategy, how you can get strong with only 6 main movements, why more isn't always better, how to get started in as little as 1 session per week, and much more. I've been following the Mindful Mover for a number of years and experienced some benefit from this style of training myself. And if you are someone who finds it difficult to commit time to multiple gym sessions a week, this is the episode for you. So without further ado, the Mindful Mover. All right, so Philip Chubb, it's really good to have you on the podcast. I have been following you for a number of years, and I really like your approach to training, as I think it addresses perhaps the most prominent reason as to why people don't train, and that is, the element of time. So for the listeners who are not really familiar with your work, how would you describe what you do?
I would describe it as, just like you said, the number one limiting factor for many people being time. We try to find out how we can get around that by helping people to train in limited amounts of time, but still making a lot of gains for the time they spend training. So small time investment for big gains. That's our whole idea.
Okay, and in what sort of area of fitness would you say you fall under? Because I know there's loads of different areas of sort of fitness, and when you talk about gains there, what specifically are you referring to?
So we tend to use a mixture of calisthenics for the upper body, working towards things like planche push-ups, handstand push-ups, one-arm chin-ups, front lever rows, because we find that those are the best strength gains, or that's the best tool for upper body strength gains. When you make gains on those movements, you find that all the other movements out there, like maybe your bench press, overhead press, all those other things, will be increasing in the background. So it kind of fits our whole model of small time investment for a lot of gains. On the other hand, for the lower body, we find that weight training tends to be more effective, especially in the long term. So for the lower body, we use things like weighted squats, split squats, things with barbells, etc.
Okay, so not traditional sort of bodybuilding bro splits as we like to call them, but a slightly different and a slightly unique take on it. So can you talk me through your fitness journey and sort of how you arrived at this sort of this idea and this sort of style of training?
Absolutely. So when I first got into training, it was about middle school. So I, kind of read a book, and it talked about how to exercise for improving one's health and everything, right? And so my workout was kind of just something like, I'll do 50 push-ups and 100 sit-ups every day, and that's where it started off. But over time, I started learning more and more and more. I got into breakdancing at one point with some of my friends, and one of them told me, "Hey, man, you would be great at planches. We should look that up." So I looked up what a planche was. And from there, I got involved in gymnastic-based strength training, as well as a group called the Movement Culture. So when I learned about that kind of gymnastic-based training and the movement type training, well, that piqued my interest. So from there, I started training a lot. And that was a funny phase in my life. At one point, I was training 6 days a week with an active rest on the 7th day, twice a day.
4 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, some of those days were 8 to 10 hours, not just strength training, but
Yeah.
yes.
Oh, that It's nuts.
I did that for most of my like late teens and my 20s. And that wasn't sustainable, obviously, long term. But that's where I started and when I went for a while. Later, basically, when I realized that that wasn't going to be sustainable, I started trying to figure out, okay, how can we go the opposite route? How can we make it so that actually we can train and gain without spending all day in the gym? And how can we make it so that everyone can do this? Because, a lot of people don't have 8 to 10 hours a day to train. So that's where the path went there.
Okay. I learned of a new concept the other day called allostatic load, and I like buzzwords, so I'm going to throw that in there to sound like I know what I'm talking about. So when you talk about you were training sort of 8 to 10 hours per day for sort of 6 days a week, and then with an active rest day, you sort of had in air quotations there because it doesn't sound like it was too restful. Do you find you were like suffering from burnout quite a lot? What was the impact of training for that sort of amount of time and the volume you were doing?
Yeah, I definitely had some issues there that in hindsight I can see were from training so much. Like, for example, one thing I had was constant overuse injuries. Wrists would hurt, knees would hurt. And it was funny because during that time, I was doing all of these prehab and injury prevention exercises. And I was basically like, I'm going to be indestructible. Nothing will hurt me. Except for some reason, I'm always injured. But and I would always rationalize it. Well, I would be more injured if I wasn't training. And that was the thing. So on the physical side, I had those problems. And on the more internal, the health side, I was noticing, I would have trouble sleeping. I had like insomnia. I'd be awake for hours per night. And I never really thought about that being like correlated possibly with my training. It was always like those things were just something like, no, a side thing. But later, I actually ended up realizing like, oh, that allostatic load that you said was a bit too heavy to carry the whole time.
Yeah. So just to sort of touch base on that, what that is, and the allostatic load, I believe someone explained to me the other day, is the kind of threshold at which you can kind of take stress in terms of be that physiological stress on the body through training or work-related stress or something, all the different stressing factors in your life. And I believe that allostatic load refers to that threshold where once you go above it, you kind of suffer that burnout phase and things like that. In terms of your sessions then, so you were saying you were training for that amount of time. I learned about the sort of RPE scale as well, or the rate of a perceived exertion from Michelle van der Vente, who's a triathlete we had on a few episodes ago. And she was saying that's not really something you can measure. But in terms of the intensity of these workouts, where would they sit on that RPE level? Do you think they were they really, really intense sessions, or do you think they were just kind of like 8 to 10 hours of, I was doing quite a lot of movement. Maybe there was some high intensity in there, or was it all just like full on super hard training?
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah. So part of that training each day at one point was like twice a day of strength training. So that was high intensity. I wouldn't say it's a 10 out of 10. If I had to rate it, it'd be like, maybe 7, 8, that kind of area. So it was intense enough to be something that I needed to recover from for sure. But surrounding those times were also other points with movement, and those would often be somewhat lighter, but it still kind of ends up adding up, especially depending on the movement. So when we were, just doing some flow work on the ground, it might stay pretty light. That's fine. But then when we're doing tumbling into grass and doing like hard landings and everything, even though it's movement, those impacts, they still hurt. They add up.
Goodbye kneecaps.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The knees, ankles. Oh my goodness! Like on one bad landing, ouch. So it was definitely the training part would be like 7, 8, and the movement part maybe could have been like anywhere down from like 3, 4, maybe as low as 2, but it could go higher too depending on what movement we were doing. So it was a lot.
But that's okay though, because you did like 4 hours of prehab work, and that's
yeah, just totally made everything fine as long as it's 4 hours of prehab.
Okay, I first heard about the movement culture through Ido Portal, so quite a prominent figure. So if anyone hasn't heard of him, the movement culture, it's probably better to let you explain what the movement culture is in your own words, really, rather than let me define it. But yeah, what would you say the movement culture is to you?
So when I first started, getting involved in it, it was kind of like they were really into checking out different forms of human movement. So, they'd be doing the gymnastics, they'd be doing like the dance work, they'd be doing the hand balancing. And it was just all about finding different movements and exploring all of them, which I really, really liked. Um, it was also there was a big element of, strength training involved in it. So, the coaching there would involve a lot of working out, getting stronger gymnastic based stuff for the upper body, weights for the lower body. So it kind of was a good inspiration in terms of like how we ended up developing our own methodology. Uh, but it was a lot of training at that time. Like anyone who's been in it knows they turn into a lifestyle. It's a lot of work, and it was not something that I found to be a long-term sustainable thing because of just how much volume went into all of that training. It was a lot.
Yeah, yeah, I can understand. So, yeah, as mentioned about that Ido Portal, and I first saw there was a YouTube channel, I think it was called like The Art of Strength or something. I think it was a calisthenics channel. All these guys in the States just doing some pretty impressive stuff, and they did like this really, really nice and well put together. Um, the editing on it was really cool of Ido Portal doing these handstands and these like animal flows, and it just looked super cool. So I got quite interested in it. I wouldn't say I was particularly involved in it, but I, was an impressionable teenager at that stage, and took it away like, yeah, I always like to do something a little bit different. So I started training and taking some elements of that training away as well. I was doing hanging work, and when I went to uni, actually, I did some hand balancing, and that's served me well. Actually, that's always a good party trick to whip out is the hand standing stuff.
People love.
Um, so I saw he did a bit of work with Conor McGregor as well at one point. So perhaps that's kind of after that point, it seemed to really grow this whole idea of movement and getting a wider platform for people to understand what it was. There was videos of Conor doing some balancing like tennis balls on his head, or like punching these tennis balls against the wall and walking along rails and things like that. And it did look and obviously if Conor McGregor was doing it, then it must be good for you.
Yeah, we should do it, right? That's such a funny thing in sports. I talked about that because I used to be involved in a lot of these different like sports and everything. And you talk to people, and it's just like whatever the top person is doing, that's the best thing to do. And it's so funny how like sometimes we might forget that they just are successful because they're the best. You know.
So you're trying to tell me that if I don't like punch a tennis ball against the wall 5,000 times a day, you telling me I'm not going to win the UFC?
It's like, well, that's the only thing to do. If you just do that 5,000, but if you
Can't it?
4,479 will not be enough. It has to be.
It's never enough. So just to go back to that point, then I see that obviously off the back of that sort of influence and things like that. I did see a real emergence of things like these animal style walks and floats. You saw the elephant walks, and for anyone who doesn't know what they are, it's probably better to Google what they look like rather than try and explain it on a podcast. But there was the lizard flows, there was the animal walks and crab walk, and whatever different walk you can think of. That was probably involved at some point. Do you think there's any merit in using any of those in your training at all, or do you think it's just more of it's just quite good and quite fun to do as a method of training, if you like?
Yeah, I think if you enjoy that sort of thing, I tell people there's nothing wrong with it. Like if it's just for the sake of you enjoy it, you're having fun, it's a good workout. There's nothing wrong with that. The question I think that sometimes can come up is things like are these things needed? Sometimes things go from I enjoy this kind of workout and it's fun then you start reading that article where it talks about this is the thing that we're missing in fitness, and if you don't have it, then you're missing something. So that when it gets to that point, now we're talking a whole different thing. Before, it was enjoyable. Now it's like something that we have to do or we're somehow deficient. I don't really subscribe to that belief or that thought at all. If you like doing like the flows and everything, no problem, enjoy it. But if you don't ever flow on the ground in that way, I think plenty of people have somehow, I don't know how, but they've made it through life without flowing on the ground like that and been totally fine, at least mostly fine, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I think the idea of fun actually is really overlooked in training. I think oftentimes people think that training has to be this super, super serious endeavor. Every time you go in the gym, you have to put that, that Sigma male music on and those heavy beats or that heavy metal and just, go at it really hard. But, I think there's loads of elements of training that you can get loads of benefits from just having a bit of fun. Like, climb a tree in the garden. When was the last time most of us as adults actually climbed a tree without people frowning at us and wondering what we're doing? But these things like these flows and hand balancing and everything like that, you don't see much of it incorporated into training. And I think training should be a bit of fun as well. What's your thoughts?
I fully agree. I think if it's not a fun thing, if you just are doing it for the sake of like being strict and I had to do this at this time, this way, every single time for the rest of your life, it's going to be just absolutely miserable. And that's if you continue it in the first place. We have to find joy and know what our bodies can do for it to be a long-term thing, I think. You see, so sometimes the sports athletes, they're able to do it for the sake of work, but then as soon as they're done their sport, they'll leave it and they'll never pick it back up again. If you ask them about it, they'll be like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to touch that. So I think I agree with you. I think it has to be some element of fun to make it enjoyable. Why would we want to work out for the rest of our lives and just hate it the entire time? That's a lot of time spent training that we don't like.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's this idea of subscribing to perfect form and everything all the time as well. And in my opinion, I don't think, I'm by no means an expert. I'm literally just an amateur who enjoys training and, pushing my body in different ways. And, I'm by no means the fittest or the strongest, but I quite enjoy exploring different things and seeing what fun and what I can make my body do. But there's another coach I sort of follow quite closely, and he does a lot of sort of carries and things like that are not even. So he'll carry 20 kilos in one hand and 60 in another or something like that, because he's of the sort of opinion that you don't do everything with a perfect form all the time. If you're reaching up to grab something off the top shelf, you're not going to be setting yourself and protracting your scapula to make sure you've got the perfect base to be able to do it. And the same with like picking stuff off the floor. It's always a bit of a laughing, an ongoing joke when you get to these sort of corporate jobs when they give you health training videos of how to pick up a box and things like that. And you're like, oh yeah, bend down and keep your back straight and make sure you're lifting with your knees and things like that. But the reality is that people don't really do that all the time. No matter how careful you can be, there are going to be times where you put your body in a position where it's not going to be perfect. And what do you think about that sort of thing, and about having, obviously your sort of training style seems to be having a carryover to different areas of life and things like that?
When it comes to form, I kind of have maybe like two main thoughts. One is that we actually say that form can be a form of progressive overload. So, today, if you are trying to do a planche, of course we can look it up, but it's basically a push-up position with your feet in the air. Now, if your hips are a little bit too low on the planche, or they're a little bit too high on your planche, well, you don't have to say, okay, I can't do a planche with perfect form, so I need to go back and do something else. You can use that planche there and say, all right, you know what? My form today is a little bit not perfect, but next workout, let's see if my form improves. And if the form improves, then congratulations, you progressively overloaded. You got stronger. So we try to help people see that form can be a way to improve. Now, of course, the disclaimer is that there are certain forms that are just like, not good at all. Like if you're doing a planche and the arms are supposed to be locked for the planche, but your arms are bent, then now you're going to have a problem. So that is something to like go back and correct. But if the hips are too high or the hips are too low, or the shoulders aren't perfectly protracted, or set properly, it's okay. They can over time improve. Now, the second point I would say is that sometimes people can easily get caught up so much in the form that they forget what they're actually exercising for in the first place.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
You might see this happen a lot with like weightlifters or weightlifting, I should say, like snatch, clean and jerk, power clean, power snatch, and sprinting, for example. The person at the Olympics, they have to keep that bar, that one extra millimeter closer or further away during their snatch or clean and jerk, because that's the difference between them winning gold medal and getting to feed their families for that, that Olympic cycle, or getting silver and just being cast off. Or in sprinting, the perfect arm swing, that is important because that's the difference between like half a second more and half a second less, and being, Usain Bolt or the person who came after Usain Bolt, who, I'm not sure who that is, but you get the idea. But that's not the same thing that we need to do for as actual trainees. Like when I go out to sprint, I'm just doing some hard gains and some cardio. So if
I've seen your sprinting videos, Phil.
I talk about it all the time. I'm like, my sprint form is total hot garbage. It's not good at all. But
it doesn't matter, does it?
No, I'm not ever going to get to race Usain Bolt, and at least not seriously, not for a gold medal. And on the day that I do, that's when I'll hire a coach to help move my sprint form. But until that day, it's just like, I don't care,
Yeah, I heard a good quote about perfectionism and things like this as well, which I think obviously perfect form. I think it was Chris Williamson. He does a quite a well-known podcast now, and he said that perfectionism is procrastination masquerading as quality control. I think that's pretty nail on the head there in terms of, if I don't have the perfect form, then I'm like, oh well, do I really do it? Or I'm obviously not good enough to do it, so why bother at all, sort of thing.
I love that. It's just like, it's just almost like another excuse to like go back and focus on anything but the actual movement. That's a wonderful quote. I like that.
It is. It is good. So talk to me about, considering what you've learned. You've coined this term of the big five in terms of exercise and things like that. Can you tell us your sort of philosophy around the big five, and also talk to us a bit about the sort of accommodating resistance element as well?
Absolutely. So our big five, I say, actually, funny place to announce it, but it's actually kind of our big six now. We added the Nordic leg curl, but it's 6 movements now that we find give a lot of carryover to everything else. So those movements are the planche push-up, the handstand push-up, the one-arm chin-up, the front lever row, the squat, and the leg curl, Nordic leg curl. Right? And we find that if you work on those 6 movements, and people oftentimes say like, oh, well, I can't do a planche push-up yet. There's progressions for each of them. So, the progressions towards them and those 6 movements. Then you find that you make gains on all the other movements. So, for example, weighted dips were not on that list. But if someone is working and progressing on that big 6 movements, then they will find that their weighted dips will likely go up in the background for free. Same thing with like maybe the overhead press. You might not be doing overhead press, but it goes up for free. Same thing with the bench press or weighted chin-ups. And the whole idea with these movements is if you work on these 6 movements, you're gaining in everything else without having to actually train everything else. So that's kind of the whole idea.
Bang for your buck, effectively.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I've had a bit of first-hand experience at trying some of these. It was a few years ago now, and I've actually just started training in this way again because I wanted to get some strength back, and I enjoyed it when I did it last time. So my experience was the one-arm chin, working towards a one-arm chin-up, and I tested a weighted pull-up, and I found that the jump in, so without training weighted pull-ups directly, I was only working on one-arm chin-up work, and that I found my weighted chin-up, I can't remember what the exact figure was at the time, but I think it went up from like 30 odd kilos or 30 kilos up to, when I retested it after, let's say 3 months, maybe 6 months,
Mm.
it went up to about, I think I PB'd at 45, maybe 50 kilos.
Yes,
And I wasn't training any weighted chin-ups directly. It was only the one-arm chin-up work. And that was my aha moment when I was like, actually, there is some method in the madness.
There absolutely is. It's like, it's not just stuff we're making up. It actually, like you said, it works. You didn't have to do the weighted chin up. You just did the one arm chin up progression work, and then you find your weighted chin up is going up in the background for free. Well, that's great, because now if you were thinking about having a weighted chin up progression day, a weighted chin up day in your program or anything, you don't have to work on that exercise. You can work on the one arm chin up progressions, and you can rest easily and sleep easily at night, knowing that your weighted chin up is going up for free in the background. That's the whole idea.
Yeah, brilliant. And in terms of, I believe this is related to strength. Where do you see hypertrophy, so muscle growth, in comparison to what we're trying to achieve here? Do you think it's solely reserved for just strength increases? And in that case, would we have to supplement the training with some accessory work, for example? Or do you think this carryover extends to muscle growth or hypertrophy as well?
Yeah, I think it definitely can transfer over to hypertrophy. Like, I don't think anyone's going to go from doing, like, push-ups, rows, and like normal pull-ups to doing then later planche push-ups, handstand push-ups, one-arm chin-ups, front levers, and increasing their squat and everything, and not get bigger. This is just not going to happen. Our bodies are going to adapt. Now, what we tend to tell people is, okay, keep working, and keep gaining. And as you're gaining, see, are you getting bigger? Or are there any areas that are lagging behind? Now, if they start to find, oh, hey, I want this area, like, maybe my neck or my abs, I want them to kind of come out a little bit more. Okay, now, after we've done this base work here, we can toss in a little bit of isolation at the end if we needed to work on those specific areas. But like, we do it after we've tested to see if the base stuff will work. It's kind of like, what's the point of starting off with all these extra, toppings on the training when maybe just the base would have worked? And then later, if we need the extra toppings because we actually find out that they're needed, then we can add them in.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. So it's almost like you're getting your foundations work done with these the big six, as you call them now, and anything else you want to add on top of that. So if you want bigger arms, you can do your 100 sets of curls by every week. If you want a bigger chest, you can do whatever exercise you want to do to be able to do that as well. So in your quest for finding the minimal effective dose, as you call it, or the sort of most bang for your buck movement, what have your strategies been for being able to test and prove the effectiveness of each of these methods?
Oh, that's fun. So like, for finding out which exercises have carryover, right? What we basically have to do, we limit what we're doing. So we just do like 6 rep big six, right? And this is where sometimes it calls for a little bit of it can be a little scary at first, right? It's like, I'm not doing this other exercise or that one. I've never not done the exercise before. So we would practice those exercises only, just the big six. And then we test the other exercises and see every now and then, are they going up? So maybe what I would do is I would start off doing a movement, like, I don't know, I'll test a deadlift. I'll see my max in the deadlift. And then I'll write that down. And then now from then on, for the next 6, 8, 12 weeks, whatever time period I set, no more deadlifting. No deadlifting at all, just the big six. Then at the end of it, I retest the deadlift. Did the deadlift go up? If it did, great. We found out, the big six transfers over to this movement. And if it didn't, then we find out, okay, maybe the big six doesn't transfer over to that movement. And when we did that, we found that just nearly every movement we could think of would go up. So for the sake of exercises, we found that's the way we test to see how much we need to do in terms of exercises to make gains with everything. In terms of the volume, this is another scary one. What you can do, what we do, we just keep bringing the amount of work that we do down. So it's like, okay, maybe the first week we try 5 sets. Then next week we see, do we make gains with 5 sets? Great. Let's get scary now. Let's drop down to 4 sets. Now, after 4 sets, the next week, do we make gains? Great. Let's try dropping into 3. And from there, we keep playing around until we find the amount of work that actually needs to get done to make gains. It's kind of scary, but it's really fun.
Yeah, it sounds like you've put in a lot of time, and I think it's good that we have access to this information at this point, so we don't have to, because who's got this? At least now I have an excuse for my chicken legs, and that I can say that I'm just testing my upper body big 6 at the moment, and I'm not working on that. I'm not blaming genetics or anything like that.
I love it.
So the time frames in which you're doing this as well. Let's say you're testing your deadlift as you mentioned before, and you said you're reducing these sets, on a periodic basis. What sort of time frame do you generally go for when you're testing something in particular?
We try to do at least 6 weeks, because if you do too often, if you were to do, some people might try to do it once a week or once every other week, but we've seen people literally gain on movements training once every 2 weeks. That's still enough time to gain sometimes, as long as, especially if you're training hard and you're working near that peak point. So we try to push it to around at least 6 and sometimes longer. That way we can really get to see, did this movement increase without direct work, or does it stay the same, or does it drop? Otherwise, too soon, you're basically at that point training the movement,
Yeah, definitely. And I've seen you've done some stuff on sort of the cardiovascular stuff as well. So not just the big 6, but you've been looking at how you can apply this method to getting the most out of improving your cardiovascular side of things with the least amount of time possible. Was that a fair assessment?
Yeah. We've done the same thing with that. I used to do something called a sprint drop set, which is pretty much the most miserable thing one can ever do to themselves. The first thing you want to do is to try it out is you have to determine how much you hate yourself. And if you really do hate yourself, then this is going to be perfect for you. So first determine that. Then you go find maybe a big hill or a big strip of grass. That's just be something soft. It's better to do it on a soft surface, a track, whatever. And you break out into a full sprint, and then as you're sprinting, you're going to start fatiguing, so your sprint will drop down to a run. The run will drop down to a jog. The jog will probably drop down to a walk, maybe a crawl. Then you'll fall on the ground, you'll die, you'll cry, and then you'll rest, and then you might do it again 1, 2, maybe 3 sets, but most people aren't going to get past probably 2 of those. And then you don't do that again for another 7 days, 8 days, and you do it again, you're good to go. I did that for some time, and I found that my gains kept increasing for quite some time before it kind of leveled off, which is what a lot of people find with cardio anyway. Especially with those longer sprint times. It works for about 2 months, 8 weeks, and then at that point it starts to kind of level off a little bit. So we found that was really effective for getting to that point without having to spend a lot of time doing it.
So in terms of what you were measuring there, did you have a stopwatch on how long you could go for, or was it distance, or as you excreted from the body, and how much you?
That's how long we go before we just fall on the ground and just die and cry. How much crying we did? Was there any sweat left to cry with? Yeah, we measured distance, speed, and endurance and everything. And I found that after about 8 weeks, that's when it started to just level off, and it wasn't improving anymore. But for that small time investment, which was barely anything at all, I was really happy with the gains I made with 8 weeks of training.
Yeah, that is really, really interesting, actually. I had just going back to the triathlete, so she does Ironman, so obviously very long, very, very long distance endurance events, and we were talking about how to split sessions and things like that, and there's something we'll come on to in a sec. But the there's this idea of when she does the hard sessions, she says she does easy sessions as well. And she says you need to make the easy sessions, they need to be easy, like they need to be really relaxed before, in order to be able to go really hard on the other sessions. So it sounds like it's got a bit of transfer to what you're doing here as well. So you're going, the hard sessions are very, very hard in that you're pushing yourself to the absolute limit and, consuming many, 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 many boxes of tissues with how much you're crying at the end of the sprint sessions. But you said you're testing it every 7 days. So that rest period is really, really long, and you're making sure you're doing, what do you sort of do on those days in between? I think I've seen you do like long walks and things like that as well.
We typically go for walks, and like you said, like your other podcast person came on, the low intensity stuff is very low intensity. So we go for walks, and I call it urban hiking. We just go up hills in the neighborhood. So it's low intensity. It's not really hard work. Well, it's just for circadian rhythm. It's for recovery. It helps you get outside, helps you sleep better that night. And we do those on the off days. So we have the really, really hard workouts and the really, really soft, relaxing walks up the hills and everything. And we stay out that middle zone where it's kind of fatiguing, but not so strong that it goes into that little hard day.
Yeah. Okay. You mentioned circadian rhythms there. So how does that incorporate into your sort of training, your exercise regime?
Oh man, that was huge. So, I have an autoimmune condition called ulcerative colitis. So I got really into health basically because I wanted to help improve my my autoimmune condition. So one of the things I was learning about was circadian rhythms and how those help with health and recovery. And what we were basically finding out was that things like light, exercise, food timing, temperature, and socializing, those can have a big effect on one's health. So like, for example, if you can get outside every morning, and get some sunlight on as much of your skin as legally and morally possible.
Yeah. Don't go walk around naked.
Yeah. So definitely don't go outside and say, "Well, Phil told me to do that." No. No, you keep it modest. but yeah, as much as you can, that will help to set your circadian rhythm. And then if you can do it again at solar noon, which is usually some place between 12 or 2 o'clock, depending where you live, that will again help it. If you can do it around sunset, that can help it. So we tell people, try to get outside 3 times a day, sunrise, solar noon, sunset, and that light helps to stimulate your circadian rhythm, which is a fancy way of saying your body's biological, internal clock, knowing what time of day it is, and you'll notice you'll sleep better at night. And then we also have the opposite at night. During the nighttime, we try to close the blinds. We use blackout curtains to make sure the room is pitch black. You can't see your hand in front of your face. This is a hard one. We try to turn off technology like our cell phones and the TV 2 hours before bed. And instead, we read some books underneath a red light. It's basically the light you would use for a reptile. So that helps us to get back to sleep at night. And if you do these things, man, you will see that your sleep just improves so much. Your health feels better. Your energy feels better. It's wonderful. We found that along with all the other things like intermittent fasting, like the food part, exercising a little bit in the morning, getting active, getting those walks and everything, it helps so much for our health and our sleep every night. But it's been a blast to actually learn about those things and improve them because it's wonderful.
Yeah, definitely. I've actually got some of these. I'll show you. Obviously, you can't see on the podcast if you're listening, but I've got some of these, which are these are blue light
blockers. Yeah. Uh-huh.
And it's almost a bit like when you turn the setting on your phone, basically that night mode where it kind of goes to that warm tone of color.
Yeah.
I've been using those. They're pretty good actually. But the importance of sleep is really that's come up quite a bit actually in some of the other episodes, and how important it is to get a good night's sleep, and the strategies you can implement to do that. So I've also seen that circadian rhythms can really influence things like jet lag as well. So you can use that to your advantage to counter jet lag and make sure, when you're coming back. I think it's from west. I think it's from west to east. It's worse than it is from east to west, but I think, well, maybe it depends on your original destination, but or your home sort of area. But yeah, that's really interesting. Okay, so just going back to the sort of training method you're implementing there. If I'm just looking to get started with this, what would you recommend as a good place to start into incorporating these big six movements into our training, and then obviously some of the other elements you talked about as well?
I would definitely start with the beginner versions of those movements. Like, let's say you're a beginner. I'd start with the beginner versions, which would be like the lean forward push up, which is the beginning version of the planche push up. Then there's the pike push up for the handstand push up. There is the chin up or mixed grip chin up for the one arm chin progression. And if there's someone who can't do a chin up, then we use the assisted chin up. And then we have a movement called a bodyweight arc row for the front lever rows. And then we combine that with assisted single leg squats for most people, or some sort of back squat, whatever they have available. Depends on if they have a gym or not. And a Nordic leg curl progression. And that gets people off on the start towards the rest of the big six movements that come later afterwards. But if you have those basic foundational movements, then you are going to be able to progress further.
Brilliant. So squat for the legs, you've got planche push up for what's that, chest and shoulders area maybe?
Yeah, like a horizontal push almost.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And then you got your one arm chin up would be, or the regressions are more for the pulling movement, and the same with the arc rows.
Yep.
And then your handstand push up, again, your pushing movement. So you got pushing like in two planes maybe, and then pulling in a couple of planes as well. Is that a fair assessment?
Yep. You got two vertical push, vertical pull, horizontal push, horizontal pull, and then we have squat and leg curl.
Very nice. So if you're on a normal training split of chest, legs, and things like that, now you can adapt it. So you can say, I'm training the horizontal today. That's an interesting one. I'm training planes today.
It fits into everything, really. Like, yeah, if you're doing something like bodybuilding, you're just like, I want to actually be able to also do some cool calisthenics work. You can fit it in just so that if you have a chest day, a chest and shoulders day, where you just put the planche push-up work in that day, and bam, you're good to go.
Amazing. Okay, so Phil, if people want to find out a little bit more about this big six and how you train and some of the methodologies you use, where can someone go to find out a bit more information?
So they could check out our Instagram, which our handle is the _mindful_mover. We also have a YouTube, which is, look up Mindful Mover. You'll find all of our videos on there. I think my wife, she's the brains behind all this. So I think she recently made a TikTok, which she's sharing videos too from there. And then if you want, they can send us the email, which is mail@mindfulmover.com. You can contact us and we'll respond back right there.
I will put those in the description of the podcast so everyone can have a look and find out more about this sort of style of training. And do you offer coaching as well? Is that something you...
Absolutely. That's our whole thing. We do online coaching. So we help people who really want to make that wide range of gains, make all the gains possible, but in the limited time
Phil,
frame. Thank
you so much for your time. This has actually been such an insightful chat, and I think there's a lot of takeaways from this, especially if you're low on time, you don't have much access to a gym or something like that, or even sounds like you don't really need access to a gym for this. You just need access to would you say like a pull-up bar, and that's about it really, or a partner that's heavy enough to give you some resistance.
Absolutely. If you have a pull-up bar, you're doing great. If you have a pull-up bar and some rings, now you're fancy. A pull-up bar, some rings, and maybe like a little bit of weight for the squats. And at that point, you can just go ahead and you don't have to even go to the gym. You're good to go.
Yeah. So not only are we saving time, we're saving money as well. So look at that.
Yes, absolutely.
Phil, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.